Hi, this is John Finnegan, and I had the great pleasure of speaking with Sean Swarner today. Sean's an incredible leader. He's a philanthropist, an author, and keynote speaker. He is a two-time terminal cancer survivor dedicated to helping others reach their full potential. Sean created Cancer Climber with his brother in 2001, a nonprofit organization that pays for and travels with cancer survivors to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, located in Tanzania, East Africa, near the Kenyan border. Sean's passion for climbing and adventure blossomed after becoming the first cancer survivor to summit Mount Everest. Since then, he has climbed all 7 summits and has skied to both the North and South Poles, making him the first cancer survivor to complete the Explorer's Grand Slam. He accomplished all of this and completed the Hawaii Ironman, all while having only one functioning lung. His adventures and passions have captured the attention of millions, and in 2017, a team followed Sean to the North Pole and made a documentary about him and his triumphs. The documentary, True North, was released on Amazon Prime. In 2018, Sean was voted one of the top 8 most inspirational people in history and was the recipient of the Don't Ever Give Up Award presented by the Jimmy V Foundation and ESPN. I know you will enjoy this conversation. Welcome, Sean Swarner. I'm so delighted that we could have a conversation this morning. I'll do an introduction later about who you are in a proper manner. But for now, let's just get started. And if you would be so kind as to share with us um, where it all began for you. You and I are some Midwestern boys and share quite a bit in common, as we've discovered in our last couple of conversations. But how did this all get started for you?
Well, I appreciate that. I'm guessing you don't want to go back almost 50 years to when my mom and dad got together and then 9 months later. So we'll skip that. Everybody knows where kids come from.
Yes.
My story begins, I would say, 13 years old, and it was something that I don't think anyone would wish on their worst enemy. Because I remember I was going up for a layup in basketball, just a short story, going up for a layup in basketball, came down and my knee snapped, and it sounded like the turkey leg when you're eating it for Thanksgiving, right?
Right.
That without getting too descriptive, that
Yeah.
tearing and snapping. So that's exactly what my knee sounded like.
You knew.
I knew something was wrong, but I thought it was just my knee. But that knee injury changed my life forever,
Right.
because it wasn't just the knee. So the doctor stuck me in the hospital because the knee injury swelled up every other joint. Later on, it was inflammation from cancer, which we'll get to. They stuck me in the local hospital. I grew up in Willard, Ohio,
Mhm.
population 5,000 back then. I think it's probably the population may have boomed up to 5,010 by now. I don't know. So
We're both Buckeyes.
Well, yes. However, I'm going to say go blue because Michigan,
Yeah.
because Bo Schembechler was my second cousin.
Oh, really? I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
So, but my mom, who was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, that was Bo's on my dad's side. Woody Hayes was a friend of the family on my mom's side.
No way.
Uh, so come the end of November, we were literally a house divided. And it was my mom, my dad, my brother, and myself. And
Yeah.
each one of them, my dad and my mom, tried to pull either my brother or myself onto the other side of the house. We're watching the game.
Oh, that's great.
But we'll have to talk about how Bo and Woody were actually friends. It was the media that pitted them against each other. But the stories about how one story we'll get back to the question. Woody Hayes crossed the Ohio State, Michigan State border. He was driving back from a recruitment trip or something like that. He ran out of gas because he refused to buy fuel in Michigan. So he walked across the state line, got some fuel in a can, brought it back to his car, drove across the state line back to Ohio just to buy fuel in Ohio State.
That is crazy.
So
Wow.
going back to the whole cancers, yeah.
Yeah.
They stuck me in the hospital, the local hospital, and they started treating me for pneumonia. And it's very difficult to cure cancer by sucking on a nebulizer, so I wasn't getting any better. Yeah, my body was still swelling. And then I remember the doctor, who was a family friend, pulled mom and dad in the hallway. And that's when my whole family, the first time we heard the O word, Terry, my mom, do you know of any oncologists? And that's where the atmosphere just plummeted.
Hmm.
The energy just dropped. When I was there, eighth grade, I was enjoying it because the cheerleaders were coming in, visiting me, bringing balloons and cards, and it was great. I was getting all this attention, but on the flip side of things, my body was battling this internal struggle. My mom grew up, like I said, in Ohio, in Columbus, and she went to high school with a friend who was a CEO of a hospital. So she called him and asked him, hey, if one of your daughters got diagnosed with cancer, who would you take them to? And instantly he said, Dr. Davis. So we had no questions, no qualms, nothing. We just went right to Riverside Hospital in Columbus. And that's when I met Dr. Davis, him and his suspenders. He was kind of like Steve Urkel of the time, but super intelligent. And he became a good friend, diagnosed me with advanced stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. And at that time, they said that I only had 3 months to live,
Yeah.
which no one wants to be given that diagnosis. And I remember how when you're that age, 13, 14, 15, we'll get to it because I've had two cancers completely unrelated. But when you're 13 years old, say eighth grade, freshman in high school, what were your biggest fears and concerns? Maybe where you're going to sit at lunchtime,
Right.
making it from class to class after the first bell and the second bell, you had 3 minutes to get from class to class, you might get in trouble.
Sure.
Now imagine being 70 pounds overweight because of the steroids that were pumping through your body. You're on your hands and knees, your hair is falling out in clumps, clogging the drain, and the water in the shower slowly rising up.
Yeah.
You look at things a little differently, where
Hmm.
I wasn't worried about being popular. I was worried about literally living.
Hmm.
And that's where my whole perspective shifted. And at such a young age, I realized that I didn't want to focus on not dying. I wanted to focus on living. Same concept, different perspective.
Right.
Looking at it from an entrepreneurial standpoint, do people go into a business thinking that they don't want to lose money?
Right.
They might, and guess what happens? They probably lose money and they're out of business.
Right.
You focus on, I learned that I wanted to focus on what I wanted, not the avoidance of what I didn't want.
Where did
And
that maturity come from at such an early age? What do you attribute that to?
being forced, and I tell people all the time, you always have a choice in every situation that you're given.
Hmm.
And I chose to fight for my life as opposed to give up and die.
Hmm.
But I think I was forced into maturity and seeing things differently.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I also realized that I was 13 years old. I had an entire life to live. And I started thinking about how I could live that life. And one of my personal core values is family.
Hmm.
And I actually projected into the future when I was that 13-year-old boy I just mentioned on his hands and knees sobbing. I projected into the future just a couple months because, like I said, I was given 3 months to live. What would my family's lives look like if I died? And that's something very powerful where I pictured what my mom and dad would be doing if they lost their firstborn son. So I thought to myself, I couldn't do that to them.
Hmm.
So that's one of the reasons why I kept fighting. So I think a lot of it the maturity stems from realizing that my journey could affect others.
Hmm.
I didn't want it to have a damaging impact on their lives because I value family so much.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, how is it that you survived this first bout with cancer?
I would say it's not a silver bullet, it's not one thing. I would say it's a combination of the miracle of modern medicine, family support, prayer, and just an inner will to not give up.
Hmm. Yeah.
All those things coming together.
Hmm. Were there any scientific advancements during that period of time that contributed to your cure?
Not at the time. However, if if I could go through what I went through now,
Hmm.
absolutely.
Hmm.
The technology, the treatment has changed significantly, but what hasn't changed, and this is what boggles my mind, what
Hmm.
hasn't changed is the mindset that the people have who are getting diagnosed
Hmm.
because of how this news is delivered.
Hmm.
So, for example, let's just say you sit down, like, and knock on wood, this never happens. Like, I'm the doctor. I'm like, John, you have cancer. This is what it is. We're going to help you and do everything we possibly can to get you through it. You tuned out. You didn't hear anything
Yeah,
after you heard you have cancer.
right.
If it was just flipped around, different perspective. Hey, John, you have a condition. It's very treatable. We're going to do everything we possibly can in our power to help take care of you. And oh, by the way, it's cancer.
Right.
You've heard everything leading up to that one point, and now you're open minded, thinking to yourself, oh my God, this isn't a death sentence. This is something I can handle. Let's do it.
Hmm.
That's what happened with me because initially my parents didn't tell me that I had cancer. They said that I had Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Hmm.
Now, being how can I put this nicely? A kid who was very curious.
Hmm.
I went to the hospital library and looked up Hodgkin's lymphoma and found out it was cancer. But
Right.
I think how it was delivered to me was from a positive perspective, and that came from
Good.
my parents.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened next?
Yeah. Next was a lot of fun. I was a normal kid again.
Hmm.
I was running track, pole vaulting, cross country, swimming. I was a normal teenager, probably a little bit less than normal because I learned how to do the things I shouldn't do, but not get caught. So that's how I was a little different. I found ways to get away with things. And
You were a normal teenager.
it pretty much, yeah. And that's all I wanted. It was just to be normal. And I was normal for a year. And then going in for a checkup for the first cancer, they found a second cancer and they diagnosed me with a type of illness that only 3 people out of a million get. And the prognosis was 6%. So out of, let's say you have 100 people who get this illness, 94 die. But no one's ever had Hodgkin's and Askins sarcoma before. And we were talking about the lottery before we started filming.
Yeah.
It's funny because the chances of me surviving both those cancers is equivalent to winning the lottery 4 times in a row with the same numbers.
Hmm.
It, it, I'm
It's
a
crazy.
living, breathing, walking miracle. Absolutely. It's crazy.
Right.
You know? And this time around, they gave me 2 weeks to live.
But you were a curious kid. You were back at the library, I suspect. Now you're reading more, and the data didn't look so good to you, did it? Not at the library.
Not at all. But the funny thing was, this time around, things happened so quickly, I didn't have time to go to the library because no one's ever had these two cancers before. They actually put me in a medically induced coma for a year. in and out of the hospital. So there are moments of clarity, as an alcoholic would have a moment of clarity.
Right.
I had a moment of clarity every once in a while because I was out of the hospital recovering. Every time I was in the hospital for treatment, nothing.
Yes, but you carried something with you into that second round, and that was mindset, right? You had that going
Absolutely.
for you. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
what happened next?
Well, I went through 3 months of intense chemo, a month of radiation, and then 10 more months of chemotherapy. The radiation killed my right lung, so I only have one functioning lung.
Right.
But then again, with the mindset, asking myself, and I did this the first cancer, like, why me? Why me? Why me? Second cancer, why me? My God, what's going on? What did I do to deserve this?
Right.
That, what good would that do? How would that change the fact that I had cancer?
Right.
Granted, people have to go through those steps and stages, but ultimately, I realize there's nothing I can do about what's happening to me, except I can change how I react to it. That's always a choice.
How long did the disease and the treatment um, cause you to be physically diminished and unable to get back to a normal life?
Great question. I would say about a year, because immediately after surviving the second cancer, I wanted to go back in the pool and swim back and forth, just do a 50-meter breaststroke
Yeah.
so I could swim at the league championship meet in the summer. And to do that, I would have to qualify. I had to swim in one dual meet,
Yeah.
just back and forth. So I remember I put on my super flattering Speedo at the time and jumped in the water. And I swam one lap and my arms felt like they were at the bottom of the pool.
Mm,
And then I was so distraught and so broken. I climbed out of I had to use the ladder to pull myself out. Normally you just grab, the wall and just whoop, pop right up.
I
I,
remember those days.
yeah, but I had no strength.
Yeah.
Like, how was I going to get myself back? And I think it was a full year before I got back into shape again. I started running, I started swimming. But a year after being placed in remission, I was in my league's high school championship and I won the 800-meter run.
Hmm.
So that's when I knew I was back. But I always had a different purpose and higher standards for myself.
Hmm. So you're now 15?
The second cancer was 16. So essentially, there was 1 year, but from 13 to about 17, 18, just my teenage years were gone.
Yeah. Boy, I was going to say these are critical years. Okay, so a year went by. You had the treatment, you survived, you had another year to get back. Is that a fair statement?
Fair statement. Yep.
To 17 years of age.
Correct. But if you look at where where I came from and where I'm still going in life, it's always an uphill battle.
Mhm.
You can train and train and train, you can work and work and work. Going uphill never gets easy. It
Right,
gets easier,
right.
but never gets easy.
I seem to recall that you mentioned to me that you swam for Westminster College.
I did.
Yeah. So you made a comeback. I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that you're 17 and now pretty soon you're off to college. How did that happen? How did you end up on the swim team for Westminster?
Well, I swam competitively from 6 years old, maybe,
Okay, you never
all the
stopped.
way, I never stopped,
Right.
and all through college. But the thing was, to remove the tumor, they did a thoracotomy, which is basically cutting into my right lat muscle, snapping open three ribs and removing the tumor.
Right.
And even now, you can see the scar. I'm numb from basically from my right side all the way around.
Mhm.
And you kind of need your lat muscles to swim.
Right.
So now, because I only have essentially one strong lat muscle, and this one was cut into,
Right.
I jokingly say I swam in circles, swimming on one
Right.
side.
Yeah.
And I took wasn't getting any faster in college. So my junior year, I stopped and I became a student assistant coach instead. I wanted
Okay.
I wanted to help others.
Yeah, good. Well, that was an important dimension as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. Now, here's where it gets fuzzy for me because you and I talked about many of these things. I've seen your documentary. I loved it and encourage everyone to watch it. And oh, by the way, we all have access to it from your website, which is terrific. Um, so, um, what happened next? Which this part is fuzzy for me.
As you said, I went to college and I just wanted to be normal, but I knew cancer had affected me in some way.
Right.
And how do you bring it up on a date? You know,
Mm,
it's not casual dinner conversation. Hey, how's your steak? How's your salad? I had cancer. How do you bring it up casually? You can't. So I just completely ignored it for the longest time, which was a big mistake.
right.
And I graduated college after, well, I started off molecular biology, took organic chemistry, immunology, but because I was like Belushi from Animal House, those classes are pretty difficult to pass when
Yeah, I
you
was
don't
going to
want to
say
bother study.
that's pretty tough. Yeah.
So I graduated with a psychology degree and
Mhm.
then went to further my education to get my master's and my doctorate in psycho-oncology. I wanted to be a psychologist for cancer patients because
Right.
as we know, cancer is not an individual disease.
Right.
Drove 1,000 miles away from home, and it was the first time that I was separated from my family, first time I was separated from the cancer stigma, let's say.
Hmm.
And it was also the first time that I had a panic attack
Mm.
because driving down there, I never dealt with what the cancer meant to me. Because
Wow.
when you go through something traumatic, it affects you.
Of course.
You know, it can be something like cancer, it could be a car accident, it can be a divorce, it can be a wedding, even because the body doesn't know the difference stress wise from a wedding and a divorce.
Right.
So I had to pull over and I spent an entire night staring at myself in the mirror, just asking myself these deep questions. You know, I wasn't tired from driving from Ohio to Florida. I was just literally in my mind at the time, I was freaking out.
Right.
And then afterwards, I realized that I couldn't continue down that path and help other people until I helped myself first.
Okay.
So I dropped out of school. I realized that I had strayed so far off the Midwest ethics, young man morals that my parents instilled in me. I
Right.
was a bartender at one of the largest clubs in Jacksonville. I was like the cocktail movie, spinning bottles, blowing fire. I thought it was, slick, you know what. And that's when I realized that I couldn't continue down that path because I saw people doing so many different types of drugs and getting into trouble. I was like, that's not me.
Right.
Dropped out of school, and my brother graduated from Allegheny right around that same time, which was just north of where I went to college, an hour. And he came down to Florida. We lived with each other. We lived together for a while. When I dropped out of school, I realized that I wanted to give something back to people touched by cancer because it impacted me in such a profound way.
Hmm.
But I wanted others to not be sorry for having cancer, but to be excited
Hmm.
about the new lease on life you get after cancer.
Hmm.
Because after you go through something like that, like I mentioned, all those other issues, you can come out on the other side a bitter, angry person, or you can choose to see it as empowering.
Hmm.
And I wanted to use what I went through to empower myself and others.
Hmm.
And I started researching ways to literally scream from the rooftops of the world that there's hope.
Right.
And logically, for me at least, logically, most people are like, logically, how did you come up with that? Logically, I did more research and more research and more research and found no cancer survivor had ever climbed Mount Everest before. And I thought there's a perfect platform.
Right. Yeah. And you've always enjoyed athletics.
Love being outdoors. I was in high school and in college. I was also known as Nature Boy as well as Cancer Boy, but Nature Boy stuck.
Yeah. So that was the start for you. There was another thing that I saw in the documentary, and it's kind of mixing our metaphors. You said you were shouting from the rooftops, but I would say that you took also a grassroots approach by meeting with individual cancer survivors and connecting with individuals. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. And even taking it a little bit further, speaking of grassroots, when I came up with the idea of climbing Everest, obviously I don't think I could do it by living in Florida, which is a giant sandbar. I moved to Colorado and lived in Estes Park, and for 2 or 3 months, I lived out of the back of my car. I camped. I didn't even have a place to live.
Mm.
And my brother was with me, and we used the library and a payphone bank as my office. So imagine you work for a large corporation like, say, Cabela's, for example, right? Hey, John, I'm a two-time cancer survivor with one lung who's going to be climbing Mount Everest in 9 or 10 months. How would you like to come on board and help out with sponsorship? Hello. And then the ones who actually did come on board,
Yeah,
like, okay, well, how can we call you back? What's a good number? I had no phone.
right. Wow, that I mean that for a young man to be doing that, I mean, what foresight? Where did you come up with the idea of reaching out to companies like that, asking for help and sponsorship? Um, that's astounding that you did that at such a young age.
Well, looking at the price tag that it takes to climb Mount Everest, I
Yeah,
realized I couldn't afford it myself. I needed
yeah,
help.
yeah, and so many other things that you have done.
Yeah.
So your documentary is post McKinley or Everest, excuse me, and therefore you really learned how to do this. That was an important part of what needed to be done in order for you to move forward with your goals.
Correct.
Yeah,
So I think one of the biggest things that I did differently than most people, a lot of athletes go after, say, the North Face or Marmot or Patagonia. They go after the corporation. And no one would believe in me. No, they just said it's impossible to climb Everest with one lung.
right,
So I reached out to the companies who actually manufactured the clothing aspect, the clothing line
right,
for all of those companies.
mhm,
Gore-Tex.
right,
I got in touch with Gore-Tex and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. I really need help and support to reach other individuals, other corporations. I'm not asking you for donation. I'm not asking you for help, for
mhm,
sponsorship. I'm just asking for someone to open the door for me.
mhm,
And because it wasn't a hard ask of, hey, this is what I need, it was more like, hey, how can we do this together
mhm,
to impact the world?
mhm.
So they came on board as a sponsor, and then they introduced me to some other corporations, and it went from there.
Okay, you got a foothold.
Absolutely. The door was wide open.
What was the climb like then? What did you run into unexpected obstacles?
I did. I would say climbing when I did is very different than what it is now. We didn't have the long queues of people who are standing in line waiting to get up.
Right.
I was a third person to summit that season. I think 50 people summited that year.
And what
And
year is this now?
2002.
Okay.
So while I was on the mountain, I experienced a an ever your quintessential Everest storm, hurricane force winds, 2 days, 2 nights, and I didn't get any sleep because I was holding up the frame of my tent and I had what micron thick fabric separating me from death.
Yeah.
And speaking of death, I remember being in my tent at Camp 2, which is a relatively safe area,
Right.
where I had a friend up at Camp 3, which is on the side of the Lhotse ice face, which is a sheet of uh, bulletproof ice at a 45-degree angle that goes on for a mile. And a friend went up in that storm. He couldn't find his tent, no food, no water, delirious for 2 days, 2 nights. On his way down, misclipped on a guide rope and tumbled over 3,000 feet into a crevasse. So when something like that happens, well, for me, I started thinking about all the other people who perished on the mountain and why would they die and not me?
Hmm.
You start to think about your own mortality.
Right.
And you also start thinking about your own purpose.
Hmm.
And my purpose wasn't to get myself to the top. The
Hmm.
entire time I was climbing, I had a flag about this big that had names of people touched by cancer.
Hmm.
My purpose was to get everybody touched by cancer to the top of the world.
Hmm.
And being on the mountain was the goal,
Hmm.
and coming home alive was a goal.
Hmm.
Making it to the summit was a bonus.
Hmm.
So I had a deeper purpose, and that just really resonated with me, just kind of went over and over and over and over again in my mind.
I think we should pause and reflect upon that statement that you just made, that having a deeper purpose, something outside yourself, something bigger than yourself, and in the service of others, I would think is the reason why you got there, where others may have failed. Is that an accurate statement?
I absolutely. And again, just like getting over the two cancers, I think it was a number of things. It was a combination of a bunch of things. But having that deeper purpose, absolutely. Because I knew in anything in life, you make it to the top of a mountain, there are going to be other peaks to summit.
Right,
You cross the finish line. I did the Hawaii Ironman World Championship. You cross the finish line, there are going to be other races to run.
right,
You get a raise, you're going to want another raise. You buy the new Audi R8, it's going to rust and get old, but why are you doing it?
right.
What does that represent?
So you summited that mountain, you came back, and then what happened? All of those people that you climbed for, you reconnected with them, did you not?
A lot of people I did, a lot of people on the flag were no longer alive.
Sure.
um, I remember being at base camp on my satellite phone talking to my mom, and
Mhm.
she said, "Hey, you remember the lady who we always have at Benihana?"
Mhm.
And her name was Yasuyo Suzuki. She's like, "Yeah, well, she was just diagnosed with cancer." And I got to base camp April 8th. I summited May 16th.
Mhm.
So while I was there, I got home and mom said she passed away.
Mhm.
So when I did get home, I wanted to continue reaching out to more people, wanted to continue changing lives and empowering others, not just inspiring them. External inspiration never lasts, but I wanted to empower others to climb their own mountains. And I did that by climbing the highest mountain on every continent and taking a flag that had names of people touched by cancer on each one of those peaks.
Sean, when did you start speaking then? When did your speaking career begin? After that first summit?
After Everest, probably 6 months to a year afterwards.
Hmm. And and how did that go? I mean, what kind of audiences do you speak to today? And what are the most meaningful to you?
Mm. Initially, it was the cancer community, the cancer charities, the hospitals, things like that.
Right,
Now it's been Google, Unilever, IBM, Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan, you name it. You
right,
know, it's all over the place. And those pay the bills. It's great.
right,
But when I'm up in front of a group, for example, the National Ovarian Cancer Coalition,
right.
I looking out in the audience, I know we have a personal connection. That's more meaningful than one presentation I gave, I remember a guy came up to me afterwards and he told me his experience of sitting down. He's like, and he thought to himself, oh, another keynote speaker, I have to sit through this again. But as soon as I started talking, he said he leaned forward. He's like, we're here.
Right.
There's a connection.
Right.
So for those people, it hits on a personal level. I love it. And I always make myself available at the networking event. And I love mingling and hearing other people's stories.
Yeah, because I began my career in the corporate world, and we had speakers like you in the past, and some we connected with, and some not so much. What is it that you're trying to convey today, especially if you're speaking to people in business? What key messages do you convey?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was approached by Google recently and they said, "Hey, we're looking for a motivational speaker." And it's
Right.
like, you got the wrong guy. They're like, "What are you talking about? Your story is incredibly motivational. It's incredibly inspiring." It's like, "Yeah, but how many times have you, looking at your background too, how many times have you been to an event
Right.
and the speaker got up on stage,
Right.
did his or her song and dance, got everybody in the audience lifted up, the adrenaline was going,
Right.
and then 20 minutes afterwards at the networking event, everyone forgot about what that person just said. They're on their third glass of wine, and then it's gone."
Right. Right.
So whenever I come in, I want to do three things. I want to inspire people to believe more is possible,
Mm-hmm.
motivate them to take the first step,
Mm-hmm.
but then empower them to do it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So help people understand that they have a purpose. And once you understand what your purpose is, by utilizing your own personal core values,
Mm-hmm.
you can do anything. And once you understand what your purpose is, then you can also raise your standards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you've done a terrific job, and congratulations for that. I mean, you're only getting better over time. Now, you have some big plans for the future. Now, where are you headed next? What do you hope to achieve now in the coming months?
I think I may have lost. Are you still there?
I'm still here. You're frozen. I think we'll be fine. It'll come back in just a second, but I think our internet is frozen. So yeah, go ahead and speak. There you're back.
There we go. I got you. It says, yeah, the internet connection is unstable, but
Yeah,
it'll come back. Who knows? We're having some rain here.
yeah, it'll be fine. Did you hear the question that I asked? Yeah, what's ahead of for you in the coming months?
Oh, I did not hear that. But what's ahead of me in the coming months? I always love pushing the envelope. I always love giving back, doing more, and having people think, wow. Again, inspiring people to believe more is possible and that they're capable of it.
Right,
So the next thing that I'm doing is in November, I'm running 7 marathons in 7 days on all 7 continents. And a lot of times when people hear that, their initial thought is, "Oh my God, that's not possible."
right.
And then I tell
I was
them,
one of them. As I said, my brain short circuited, and you said that.
and my response is for anyone who
Mhm.
has lofty goals,
Yeah,
for anyone who has these ideas and notions in their minds and they share them with somebody else and they say, "You can't do that, that's impossible," just like climbing Everest with one lung was impossible, right? It becomes a reflection of that person's belief in their own abilities.
right.
So I'm not saying you couldn't run 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days, but you could if you had a different mindset and you put in the time and effort and work.
Hmm. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about how you plan to do it? When is it? When does it begin? And how can we be involved?
Absolutely. So we're always looking for sponsors, always looking for corporations to come on board. We're talking to Netflix and Discovery right now, and through the New York Times and others, we have planned 500 million media hits.
Wow.
So if you assume that most people have two eyes, that's a billion eyes it's going to hit.
Wow.
So we're looking at starting in Cape Town, South Africa,
Hmm.
but the first marathon is in Antarctica because that's the biggest variable for weather. Get off the plane, run 26.2 miles, hop on the plane, sleep, go back to Cape Town, get off the plane, run 26.2 miles, get on the plane, repeat. Perth, Australia, Istanbul, Asia side, sleep in a hotel, wake up, do European side, fly to Cartagena, and finish in Miami.
Wow. It's fantastic.
Yeah. What are you doing in November? You wanna go?
We will talk about that.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible. So, yeah, that's huge. And there's a lot involved in planning. Your team is helping you pull that together. Um, yeah, to the extent that I can help, I would very much like to do that. And we're starting today by that. And not only will I post this, but any additional information that you can provide that we can put on the YouTube channel and disseminate, I'd love to do that.
I appreciate that. And one of the things that it didn't take me too long to realize was I have never climbed to the top of any significant mountain by myself.
Hmm.
You mentioned putting a team together, and my first thought was, yeah, my trainer's killing me, but he's doing it for the right reasons.
Right.
My feet hurt, but it's for the right reasons. And
Right.
I had the Sherpas on Everest. I had the doctors in the family going through the cancers. If you slow down and look, you're
Hmm.
surrounded by people who want your success. And
Hmm.
if you're not, and those people are constantly pulling you down with negative, bad energy,
Hmm.
maybe it's time to move on.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, um, on the one hand, we can be proud of what we've achieved as individuals, but we're so fortunate to have been born here in the United States. We won the ovarian lottery in that respect, and um, there is absolutely nothing that we achieve on our own. And so, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's an important point to emphasize.
Well, absolutely, and a lot of people might have the ego that's driving them forward. But let's just hypothetically say you make it to the summit of Mount Everest by yourself.
Mhm.
Hey, who are you going to celebrate with? Self high five? Congratulations! Like,
That's
what's
right.
the fun in that? The Sherpas were there, the family, everybody. You know, share the wealth.
Hmm.
There's enough to go around.
I can only imagine, though, that this goal is you have a very singular focus uh, on this, but yet you've got many things going. For example, your educational programs are also quite impressive. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I created a 3-week online mindset challenge called the Big Hill Challenge.
Hmm.
Don't worry, there's no hiking involved. You can do it in front of your computer. You don't have to go climb Kilimanjaro or Everest or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it walks people through something that I couldn't find online. So I created it myself. For the most part, when you do these, let's say, online programs,
Right.
you'll have a guru telling you this is what you need to do
Right.
because it worked for me. Well, I'm not you.
Hmm.
So I need to figure that out on my own.
Hmm.
That which is exactly what the Big Hill Challenge does. It
Hmm.
introduces you to your own personal core values to help you start utilizing those in a manner that reflects what you want.
Hmm.
And it's me empowering you and leading you from behind, encouraging you to go do it on your own through a series of micro steps and micro, what's the word I'm looking for? Micro habits,
Hmm.
right? So you're habit stacking.
Hmm. I like that term, habit stacking.
Yeah, most of the time with those other programs, you get a workbook that's 3 inches thick. You have to do 27 things a day.
Hmm.
Just doesn't make any sense. So what's going to happen? You get frustrated with yourself because you're frustrated with the program, and then you toss it out the window.
Right.
No one can change overnight like that.
Right.
Pick
Right.
one thing that might be holding you back, change it and replace it with something positive based on your own purpose, your own personal core values. I don't know what that is for you.
Right.
You do.
Right. So we have talked about the actual um, things that you do, the goals that you accomplish that are very physical in nature. We've talked about the fact that you then can come back and speak to different groups and who you connect with best and how you do that. And we've talked about the educational program that you've put together to help others in that respect. What have I missed?
I would say that pretty much covers everything. But if you look at the concept of vivid visualization, and a lot of people don't really dive too much into that because they're like, oh, well, I don't need to visualize anything. But you need to see it before it happens. If
Hmm.
you can't see it and you don't believe it's possible, then
Yeah,
guess what? You're
right.
right.
Hmm.
If you don't see yourself being the CEO of whatever corporation it is, if you don't see yourself capable of being an entrepreneur, if you don't see yourself actually being on a 55-foot solar yacht in Puerto Rico,
Hmm.
whatever that goal might be, if you can't see it here,
Right,
then it's probably never going to happen.
right.
So
Yeah.
you have to see it first. I saw myself on the summit of Everest before I got there.
Hmm.
Most people need to utilize the power of the mind's eye, visualization, to believe they can do it. See yourself there first. It's not going to happen overnight, but you have to see yourself in that position and believe it's possible.
Right. I want to be respectful of your time. Are there any other questions that I should have asked you today that I have not?
Great question. And I think we did a great job. Is there anything that you want to know, or is there anything that because my question would be, where'd you get the mask behind your head there, and where'd you like to visit on the map of the world?
That of course is Kenya, and you know, you and I have had the great pleasure of traveling many places in our lives, but it's a big world, and there are
Yeah.
still many places to go. And I want to remain vertical and take good care of myself to be able to do that the remainder of my life. I've tried to incorporate that into the work that we do in our private peer advisory groups. I hope that we're going to be able to connect calendars at some point and you'll be able to speak to our groups and they'll get the benefit of hearing from you. This is what we're doing in the interim. And I'd like travel to remain something that we do as groups, as members of our groups. And I was inspired because I attended a program in the 1990s. It was a 3-year business program that was 3 weeks a year for 3 years. And then every 18 to 24 months after that, the members of that graduating class hosted us somewhere in the world. So it might be Zurich, it might be Muscat, Oman, or the UAE. And and that was the inspiration for me is that people who live there hosted us in their homes and
Hmm.
shared with us their world. And that's what I'd like to do for the rest of my life.
That's beautiful because traveling around the world like I have, I've realized that we're so much more alike and similar than we are different.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sean, thank you for your time today. It was a real gift to get to know you better today, and I hope that continues as we continue our dialogue going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely, John. Really appreciate your time as well. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.